Welcome to Beyond the Blend, the podcast that goes behind the science and talks to the people at the heart of the lubricant market, telling the real story of the people who make the lubricant market move. With real insight and honest conversations, we aim to show off the people side from across the entire lubricant supply chain. Join me, Steve Knapp, and Rob Taylor as we delve behind the scenes of the lubricant industry. Let's go. Let's start with a quick fire five. 5 from 5. Neil, win the lottery or land your dream job?
Win the lottery, let's be honest.
Funny movie or a dramatic movie?
All dramatic.
Book smart or street smart?
Street smart.
Private office or reserved parking space?
Reserved parking space.
I like that one. Angry client or angry co-worker?
Oh, angry co-worker.
Nice one. Neil Chahal, thank you ever so much for joining us on Beyond the Blend. Some real insight into you there on those 5 from 5. One that I agree with is the private parking space, status and comfort.
Yes, and avoids any accidents to your paintwork as well, which is a bugbear of mine.
Yeah, as long as it's near the office entrance, right? So you don't get wet when you get out of the car.
Yeah, I once actually took an umbrella years ago. Must have been about 100 feet from the car park to the office. And everyone laughed at me, but you've got to stay dry. So
yeah, you've got to look right. Yeah, well,
100%.
Well,
yeah.
When I used to have hair, that was an issue. Now not. But listen, thanks ever so much for joining us, and very much looking forward to the opportunity to get to know more about you and your journey and how you see the world. Because we're only really have been connected on LinkedIn for a year or so. I don't think it's much longer than that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I see you popping up and making comments, and they're often quite humorous.
I would say that's me in a nutshell. Anyone that knows me, either anybody in the industry or friends and family alike, that's me. I can be serious when I need to be. But I think, me and a good friend of mine who you're probably well aware of who he is down in the southeast of England, we talk a lot, and one of the things that we say about this industry sometimes is it's just far too serious. And I think there's a time and a place for being serious, but we're human at the end of the day. Let's kind of cut that back a bit and have a laugh, have a joke, have a bit of a play, respectfully, of course. And I think that's me. And kind of as I've gone from sort of progressed within my career and got into kind of managerial positions, I've kind of maintained that and almost to say to staff like, hey, it's okay to have a laugh. You're at work, but try and enjoy it as best you can. And same with customers too. Take them seriously, let them be heard, but build a relationship and have a laugh with it.
Yeah, I've noticed that. And I mean, I'm probably cut from a very similar cloth. I mean, you're a long time at work, right? So enjoy what you do. So, but in that sort of brief overview, very quickly, you started to maybe unpack some values, and we'll jump into why that matters to you maybe as we go through. But when I started to do my research for today, and it's all public domain stuff, so don't worry. I've not asked these unofficial channels or anything like that. But I saw that you started at EL Oils as an internal sales assistant, and now you're back there as a commercial director, having been elsewhere.
Yes.
Just tell us about your journey and what was it that pulled you back to the same company a decade later?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So started there. I mean, I think you used the official title of internal sales assistant, which ultimately I was a T-boy and kind of went from there. So to give you a bit of background, how I ended up there the first time round was I was at sixth form, always been quite an academic kind of child, but got to A-levels and I think I was over ambitious. I was failing chemistry, ironically, quite badly. And I thought, you know what, I don't know what I want to do. I think I just want to go out and earn some money. My father was working for EL Oils, or Halso as it was back then. He's been in the industry a very, very long time, and said, look, do you want to do an apprenticeship, customer service, admin, that kind of thing? was like, yeah, sure, sounds fantastic. No real kind of, end goal, no kind of long-term career plan. I'm not ashamed to admit that either. And I think it's important that people are aware of that, particularly the younger generation coming through, nowadays. So I was there for a few years and kind of learned everything that I could, try to absorb as much as I could, from being answering the phones to being out in the warehouse, learned to drive a forklift, dealing with suppliers. So yeah, I was there for 3 years, and then as many young people do, you look elsewhere, you try and chase where the money is and that kind of thing. So I think the experiences I had, I thought I'd quite like to get into field sales. So that's what I did. And yeah, went to, a couple of different businesses, sort of, climb my way up, and then was given an opportunity a few years back. I had a manager who could kind of see, I think, the potential in me, and saw that I had, perhaps leadership skills, and I have quite a structured approach to the work that I do. And so, yeah, it gave me an opportunity to kind of, run a depot, and went from there. There's that, famous Richard Branson saying, which, if someone gives you an opportunity, you're not sure if you can do it, take it and figure it out later. And I think that's something that I've always tried to do. And so, yeah, I got a WhatsApp message about just over a year ago saying, look, we're aware, you've kind of sort of done different things since being in the first time round. We're after someone to kind of head up our lubricants division. Would you be interested? And I think just about every job I've left, I've always left on good terms. And I think this is a great, reminders to people as to why that's so important, because you never know, where you might end up again. And so, yeah, I think part of it was romanticized in my mind of being like, oh, this is great. I can go back to the place that I started at, 14 years ago as a 17-year-old. I'm now 31, with a lot of experience, from some great people along the way. So now's an opportunity to kind of apply that, to the business where it all started.
Love it. And have you got a private parking space?
No, I don't have unfortunately no, but I'm not office space anyway. So, it's maybe one day I'll have a VIP spot, but
yeah, it's really interesting when we've been speaking to a lot of folks in the lubricant sector during the Beyond the Blend podcasts, that those in leadership positions have experienced quite a lot of different roles in whether it's the same business or different businesses. And yes, you've told us T-boy to driving a forklift, but then you mentioned about leadership skills. You observed good leadership skills, or you innately had good leadership skills? I mean, how does that all come about?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, actually. I think I observed both good and bad leadership skills from, kind of previous managers that I've had. Without naming names, there's been some fantastic ones. There's been one absolutely truly awful person who thankfully retired a couple of years back, so nobody else has to endure that. But yeah, I think I learned, from various people the kind of things that I liked, and you sort of build a relationship with your colleagues, and you speak to them, and I think one of the things that always stood out to me is that everybody learns in a different manner, and everybody approaches things in a different manner. And so I think to manage a team of people, whether it's 3 or whether it's 30, it's understanding each individual person. And, that's not to say you have to tailor yourself entirely to their personality, but it certainly helps to understand kind of, what makes them tick, and also how do they learn best. I remember once in a company, we were given like a 30-page training manual. I think, well, that's fantastic if you learn best by reading. But what about for people like me who learn best by doing, or for the people that learn best by watching, or seeing things? And so kind of pulling together these different pieces that I've learned from different businesses and different line managers, that I then kind of took those experiences, but right, what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of leader do I want to be? And yeah, that's not to say I'm perfect at all. Feel free to look at my LinkedIn reference section there, just in case.
I did.
Okay, great. Well, there you are then. Perfect.
I mean, I saw that the people suggest that you push them, but you give them support. So I guess that's the yin and yang of leadership, right? Pushing and support and so forth. How would you describe 31-year-old? You've probably been, and that's not in any way a negative comment. I think it's inspiring that somebody at 31 is a senior leader in a business. How would you describe your leadership style?
I'd like to say I'm just very open, and if I were to, if you were to say what's my biggest flaw, I think it's open to interpretation as to whether it's a flaw or whether it's a skill. But if I see someone struggling, my immediate response is to take on that workload. And that's why I say it can be a flaw, because obviously you can't do everything all the time. You can't be managing and also doing. But I can't, stand back and watch someone struggle with what they're doing. And so I'll often take that burden myself and try and kind of get them back up to speed. But yeah, so very, very open, very helpful. That's how I like to certainly think of myself. There may be people out there who disagree. Hopefully there isn't, but you never know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to be having this conversation with you, because leadership at 31, leading in an organization that is traditional and made up of people that aren't 31 in leadership positions. Right?
Yeah.
That's probably the politest way that I could say that. So often when we speak with people, it's about how do they handle younger generations coming through with maybe a more digitally savvy, social media savvy mindset, where you're probably coming into it from a completely different position, right? You're coming in with that digital savvy, social media savvy mindset.
Yeah. It was one of the things that kind of wanted to touch upon today, is kind of the different generations in this industry. I know you've had some guests on who've spoken about, the younger people perhaps in their teens or their 20s coming through. No one's really spoken about kind of the millennials, the people in their early to late 30s. And I think, I'm sure every generation says this, in business or outside of business, but we're kind of the generation that's obviously bridging the two. So you've got, the guys in their 40s and 50s and older that have done it a certain way. And then there's the people that are in their 20s that are completely tech focused, more so than people like myself would be. And so almost like being a millennial is sort of that middle ground of using the older methods that you've been taught, but then also looking at the newer methods that are coming through as well. And I must admit, sometimes it's quite overwhelming, even for someone who is, only 31. I see what some of these people are doing that are 21, 22. You look at YouTubers, for instance, not relevant to our industry so much, but, you have to admire what they're doing and think, wow, they've built that from probably their mum and dad's bedroom or something. It's incredible and it's admirable. I think a lot of young people get tarnished with the label of being lazy because they're not seen to be doing as much, but actually are they just more efficient? Perhaps, I don't know.
And so I found it very interesting. You aged me things I'd learnt, and so I thank you for that reference of my age, Neil. That was very
it wasn't
very
intentional.
I think it's fair. I think it's fair comment. But within that, how do you, in your leadership of being open and being approachable and wanting to jump in, how do you help the older people in your teams maybe see some of the, if indeed you have older members in your teams, how do you help them see the art of the possible that lies within technology and digitalization?
I think patience is the key, and I think that is the key no matter how old or how experienced the people in your team are. And I think that would probably apply to just about any role, any industry. I think being as patient as you can be with people to allow them to kind of see. And also one of the things that I'm really quite passionate about is, you might have different people in different departments and trying to not even bring them together necessarily, but get them to understand the challenges that each other faces. We talk about, for instance, you look at people in positions of procurement, and then you look at people like ourselves who are in positions of sales, and understanding the psychology between the two, what drives, what your motives, that kind of thing. We should treat, colleagues in the same manner, get them to understand the challenges they face. And that could be departmental, or yes, as you've just said yourself, it could be, age and or experience, because of course it works both ways. One of the things I learned quite quickly, in kind of, managerial positions is that something that might be really obvious and apparent to us because of the experience that we've had won't be obvious to somebody else that's new. And so actually you kind of have to adjust your language and and not use words like obviously, because actually that could be, you know what I mean, someone could not take offense, but might feel belittled by that, or might be felt to feel that they're perhaps not quite capable. But actually it just comes down to experience. And so I think it works, patience applies because it works on both ends of the scale.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I observe a vulnerability as well in maybe some older members of communities. They're a little bit of fear that time or a skill has passed them by, and actually that fear of being vulnerable and not being able to leverage digital or social, and it drives a fear in them. So your leadership style, I'm sure, contributes to a good working environment there. So as a millennial in that space, was it always going to be loops, or did you just happen to land upon it, or was it destined? You mentioned your father.
Yeah, there is a photo of me somewhere. I think I was about 3 or 4 years old, wearing like an entire like Gulf oil livery set of overalls that my dad would have got.
Got to dig that out.
I'll message my mum in a bit after we finish today and see if I can find it. But yeah, so was it destined? Also, I say my dad's been in the industry for a long time, but like I think many young people know, I never thought, oh, of all the industries I could get into, lubricants, that'd be great. You've had some guests on already that have spoken about how it's not particularly attractive to younger people. I think that is probably true now more than ever before. No, so I think for me, going back to the company where I started it all at 17, it was either going to be fuels or lubricants, and for me lubricants was that bit more interesting. And there have been times where I thought, actually let's change it up a bit, let's look into a different industry, but it always claws you back. I think I can't remember who it was, but there was somebody else on one of your episodes that said kind of the same thing. That they kind of thought about going elsewhere, but you always end up coming back to it. Might have been John Grierson. Met him a couple of times, great guy. And I think he mentioned something similar about how he sort of ended up in the industry, not really intending to, but kind of having to go out there and get a job. And so a bit of similarity there, I think.
And so just so I can join the dots, was it straight from school, or was it via some other academic route?
Well, it was straight from sixth form. So, I did the first year of sixth form. I was over ambitious in choosing subjects such as chemistry and physics. Absolutely terrible at them. But I basically did like an apprenticeship. So I think like one of those schemes that's kind of like part funded by business and part funded by the government. So yeah, just did that, and quickly learned that actually you can. Being academic is fantastic, and if you can reach those heights of going to get, a fantastic degree at university, it will open more doors for you. But equally, I think there's a lot to be said for just, cracking on with it, getting stuck in and learning as much as you can. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way of doing it. I think unfortunately, there's certain businesses in this industry that I simply don't think I'd get a look in at because I don't have a degree, which is quite sad, really. Yeah, it's great if you do have that, but if you don't, it can be done. You just have to go about it in different ways, really. And, speaking of generations, I think it's really important to let the younger generation know that, that it's not, it's not me saying to anybody, forget your education, because of course education is really important. But actually, if things don't work out, if you suddenly find you've gone from being really academic to actually, the transition to higher level education becomes quite difficult for you, that doesn't mean it's game over. That just means you just find a different route to just go and, progress and do what you want.
I mean, that's really interesting because, it is a very different social environment, isn't it, right now? I mean, we've put 3 girls and, it's an expensive thing to do, for one, not only from a parental perspective, but from them as well. And you ask yourself the question about the advantages that it brings. And I think to your point, there will be some places where it's a prerequisite, almost makes you one of the same again. In some places, maybe it's not such a prerequisite. And the question that comes from my mind here, therefore, Neil, is when you're looking to employ people, I guess it's a bit preordained and answered already, but how do you determine who's a good fit? What's the right skill set? How do you go about that?
great question. One of my philosophies really when it comes to staff is attitude is everything. Attitude is more important than aptitude actually, because you can train the knowledge, you can kind of teach people along the way the intricacies of what we do. But anyone that comes in, that's got, kind of a warm personality, and, they're quite ambitious, and they're quite eager to learn. If they've got, a polite, respectful, kind of can-do, enthusiastic attitude, then yeah, great, they're in, kind of thing. And I think I'm not, I'm not into football at all, really. But you look at some of the best clubs in the world. You take, like, I don't know, I don't upset anybody, but someone like perhaps a few years back, Manchester City, when they got bought, the investors that bought them out, they didn't say, oh, when we start winning things, that's when we'll invest in the right players, right? They said, no, we want to take this club, to the very highest level. And so when they came in and invested, they invested straight away in the best kind of people they could. And I think businesses should be the same. That really is the key. It's saying, actually, yes, we want to get a return on what we're putting into our staff, whether that's salary, whether it's training, whatever it might be. Give them the best start that they can possibly have, and then your success within the business will come later. I think it's a bit short-sighted to just get people in, that are maybe on perhaps just a minimum wage, and treat them in the same way. I mean, another one of Richard Branson's saying, for instance, it's always stuck with me, is train people so well that they can leave, but treat them so well that they don't want to. And that's kind of another philosophy that I've always tried to stick to. So yeah, finding someone that's got the right kind of attitude and the right kind of personality, that's the key, and giving them a career plan too.
I have a very similar view. When I used to employ people back in my time, I would always look to attitude versus academic qualification. At times, though, the pressure to try and pick both was a bit forced on you. Someone that's got both, and I guess what you have is you have a richness. When I was backed up with the Shell brand as an example, that tends to happen. But within that space of attitude, and I'm going to push a bit here because you're a millennial, I'm a boomer, and we say you guys, you don't work as hard as us. You like it at both ends. You just want to work at home, but you also want to have time off to go to do school runs. How does all that play out in a modern leader? Because you've got a philosophy of openness. You have a philosophy of creating a collaborative environment, and you've got this juxtaposition going on around the work environment and changing. I mean, as a leader, you've probably in one of the most demanding times as a leader, right? You've got what's going on in the world and how people want to respond to COVID when we all become comfortable at home. And I say that knowing many people didn't become comfortable at home, by the way. How do you deal with all of that as a senior leader in a business?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's something that I'm quite passionate about, as you've just pointed out there, kind of people of my generation and the generation below, yes, we want the niceties of working from home, and, we want to have that flexibility, but we also want to go and succeed and achieve. And I think those are all great things. I think nobody should feel guilty for wanting those things or trying to make that the new normal, because if we didn't, at the end of the day, we have some great technological, advancements in society. I think, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was something like, in the last 20 years with progression and more than the previous 100 or something, along those lines. It's like, well, if we're progressing that much, then why aren't we using that to make our businesses more successful, but the lives of our employees easier? If we can achieve the same, if not a greater output in a short, you look at some of the European countries, for instance, doing 4-day working weeks. If you can achieve the same, if not more, why would you not? What if someone said to you, Steve, as you said, you're from the boomer generation, 20, 30, 40 years ago, if you could have achieved what you've achieved and then some, doing perhaps slightly less hours or having that flexibility to go and pick your kids up, what would you say? Would you say, oh, no, you know what, I'm glad I never had that? Or would you say, yeah, that would be fantastic? So I think, yeah, that's kind of how I view it. And it's doable, but equally, as you point out, there's times where I'll go into the office, and I'll be in the warehouse trying to sort something out, or I'll be there with a new starter, trying to help them do something. So it comes down, I think, to taking responsibility for what you do, taking pride in what you do. I'm not going to say that every young person takes pride in what they do, because I think we all know that simply isn't the case. But that's true again of any generation and any age. I don't think making people's lives easier should be something that we're ashamed of. I think we should embrace it. And one of the things that I tried to do, and had a meeting last week actually, is try and create a culture and an environment and fundamentally a business that people want to work for. Yes, I'm working, for an independent distributor, so it's never going to have the name like someone like Shell, for instance, but there's no harm in that. You can still be a small independent company that's in your local area, people want to go and work for. And I think that's really important, because staff retention is another thing that I take quite seriously. We want people to feel like they're part of a team, whether they're in an office or not. And like I say, just embrace the advancements of technology ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think be the best you can be in the environment you're in. And you did make me smile, because there are probably some people in Shell would think I couldn't have achieved what I achieved working any less. So, but that said, I mean, technology and the way it plays out into drive efficiencies and effectiveness is probably a gift that you have as a leader. And it's interesting to hear you say that framing the new norm, and the new norm could be acceptable, and 4 days could be acceptable. But behind that, I guess there's the work's got to be done message, right?
For sure. And I think another one of my, are we going to call it a flaw? We're going to call it a skill. I'll let you guys decide. But wanting to know what's going on within the business, and making sure things are done, and I'm very much against micromanagement, but that doesn't mean you can't necessarily keep tabs on what people are doing. And by that, I don't mean, what they're doing throughout their entire 7 or 8 hours. I don't really care so long as the job is done. But if you're giving them a particular task, I will check back in a suitable amount of time to make sure that task is being done. Because you're right, you have to make sure that things are done. You can't just, go home and forget about things, and you've got to make sure that you're delivering the end result, because at the end of the day, we're in a customer facing environment, and you can't let things go amiss. And that again goes back to where I talk about things like attention to detail, taking pride in what you do. If I see a dirty container in the warehouse that I know is about to go out to a customer, I'll go and give it a wipe down, because I also want to lead by example, and that's something that I take take quite seriously.
I mean, leadership by example is a very good mantra. I guess as long as the example's the right example, right? Yeah. Otherwise, we're back to where you was earlier about the one that you're not going to talk about, who was particularly the bad example. So who makes sure that you are the best you can be?
Probably a bit of a cliche, but I would say I'm my own biggest critic. I would say I wouldn't give myself a hard time about things. But for example, I'm often talking to myself in the shower about work. That's the kind of person that I am. My girlfriend the other night said to me, she's like, who are you talking to? I was like, just myself in the shower. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, honestly, I think actually I was talking to myself about what I was going to talk about on this podcast. But it could be anything, sometimes I'll be talking to myself about stock, or what I need to go and order from a supplier. Yeah, my mind is always on. And for me personally, I do have, I say the best thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts when I'm alone, when it comes to business. And, sometimes I'll dream about work. It really is that pathetic. But I'm passionate about what I do. I really, really am. And so, so in terms of who keeps me in check, it's me. 100% it's me.
Okay. I mean, that's always a good place to start, right? And I think if you're somebody that's got that clear drive and ambition and passion, I mean, maybe some of the pillow talk is a bit curious around your house, but that's a good thing. But what are some of the things that you do to switch off? I mean, where would we see Neil on a weekend? What would you be getting up to?
Kickboxing is a big love of mine, so I do that 2 to 3 times a week in the evenings. I enjoy being outdoors. I do like to be able to switch off. Turn a laptop off, close the lid, go outside. Went for a nice sort of hike on Saturday. Now the weather's getting a bit better. cars and photography, two of my other great passions. So yeah, I'm quite active and I think quite creative outside of work. And I think it's important to have that balance because I dare say this industry doesn't really leave much room for creativity unless you're in something like R&D, for instance, or if you're in maybe like a marketing team, for a big company, let's say. I think kind of selling lubricants isn't particularly creative or exciting, is it? We make the most of what we can. And I suppose this goes back to your comment at the start about, you'll often see, my sort of humorous or maybe facetious comments on LinkedIn because you got to get through the day somehow, haven't you, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, you have, and there are plenty more days ahead of you in the industry than they are me. So I'd certainly rather have you bring in that fun and energy and focus. But I do like how you just started to share some things that you do to, create the you time and the creativity within that. I guess the challenge that I'd like to leave is that you bring the creativity into the lube space, because we find through the Beyond the Blend podcast that just by telling our stories, it kind of opens up. There was something you said about it's okay to do that. And I think that's the kind of piece we want to come over through our Beyond the Blend conversations. And it's okay to share who you are. It's okay to be personal. Yeah. So I think that's kind of important.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is fantastic because, it's allowing people to kind of understand how everyone else sees things in the industry. Certainly, I'm much more confident at 31 than I was at 21, as I'm sure, many people hopefully are, because that's the right way to do things, right? I think the older you get, the more confident you should become in your abilities and yourself. And, if there was something like this, like your podcast out 10, 12, 13, 14 years when I was starting out in my career, I think I probably would have been a little bit happier overall because, you're hearing things from people, whether they're new to the industry or whether they've got 20, 30 years experience, whether they've been in one industry for 25 years, which I've always admired, or whether they've, kind of moved around a bit, people like myself. And they're ultimately, sometimes those things are fine too. And I think it's bringing people together. I think this industry, and perhaps many others, there is a lot of, competition and, there's perhaps, people speaking ill of other people and there's just no need for it. There's enough business out there, for you to have your USP, for you to do what you do in your business, to go and serve those customers, that we can all do it. And actually we can all get along. You're not going to like everybody. One of the things I've learned in being a leader is that not everybody's going to like you. That's just a fact of life, isn't it? Ultimately, that's the thing they don't teach you in school. And again, that's okay. If you do things to the best of your ability and you do it with pride and you treat people as well as you can do, then there really is no right or wrong in my humble opinion for whatever that may be worth to somebody.
It's worth a lot. And I think, I think it's worth a lot. Your perspective and your experience is as valid as anybody else's. So keep giving it, because we're listening, right? The you of 10 years ago is listening. So keep saying it. I want to jump a little bit into something I read in your LinkedIn profile and something that you've already brought up here. I'm going to just verbatim it: structure, procedure, professionalism, and consistency.
Yes.
So how does that show up, Neil? How does that show up every day?
It starts from the very, very basics of what you do. So, when I rejoined, EL Oils, the first thing I did was said, okay, let me look at the structure. Let's almost forget the sales for a moment. We'll get to that later, but let's look at the basic structures of what we do as a business and how we do it. And in terms of the day to day, it really can be anything. So this morning, for instance, before we jumped on this call with you guys, I was going through some of our old stock codes of some of the PPE and consumables that we do. Now, to somebody, this might seem, really, really, so obscure and a waste of time, but to me, it's something I think is really important. So some of the PPE had like different sizing, and some of it was numerical, some of it was, like large, extra large, medium, small, and so on. But the suppliers we use, they use both. But some of the codes had the number, some had the letter. Now, in my mind, how do you get a new starter to understand that a size medium is also a size 8, for instance? We'll put it in the stock code. Set the search parameters so that they can search. If a customer comes on and says, oh, I want a size medium, you can type a medium. If they say I want a size 8, and it's little things like this that a lot of businesses may not see the value in. A lot of people might be listening to this thinking that Neil Chahal hasn't got a clue, like that's not sales, but it is. By making the member of staff's job a little bit easier in finding the product that the customer needs, that comes back to the structure. That comes back to how is our system, our stock system set up, and how can we tailor it? How can we make it more efficient? That's just one of the things that I do. Another thing is, I'll put together, I could restructure the company network drive, and I put together some basic sales toolkits, using things I've learned over the years. I know, some of the things that you do, for instance, a lot of the Shell acronyms, for instance, they've stuck with me, too, from, also having a bit of Shell training from my time at Certas, putting those into toolkits for new people. And just making things, and also making things more transparent. I'm a big believer in transparency. I personally have had the most success in businesses where everything's transparent. Your margins, your sell prices, your costs, the whole lot. But train people to understand that. Generate reports so they can see everything that they need to. That's something that I'm really big on. So structure, consistency, transparency. And it rears its head in different ways, depending what thought I had in the shower the night before. And this is what I do. And I guess some people might think it's weird or not important, but I imagine the people with the best experience and the people that have had the most success will probably agree with my methods, and that actually it's those little things that really do matter. And it's the little things that make the difference between having an average team of people or a truly great team of people.
So I like that as a bit of an insight for people to take away from the podcast, because I think what you're trying to drive is a repeatable process. And
yes,
if things are repeatable and they're built on the right foundation, so they're effective and they're efficient, that has knock-on effects not only through your business but through the functional lines as well. So I tend to agree, and I drive a lot of our work through repeatable processes, because I think it's a great place to start. And sometimes it can look a bit odd. It can look like you can't let things go.
Yes,
you're like your story with stock codes, right? I remember my first year when I was in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I had the fortune to lead the sub-Saharan sales team, and I looked at the product lines, and there were 57 versions of Tellus 37 oil, all with different all with different descriptions, all with different, called it a barrel, a package, a tub, a can, a tin,
pale,
pale, oil, lubricant, and it was almost madness because it created confusion. Customers' invoices were never sent correctly. Customers couldn't reconcile them, so they couldn't pay them. Stock holding was an absolute nightmare. So I'm entirely with you, Neil, and I think I would be a good employee of yours. But how do you handle it when there are these inconsistencies and somebody kind of like just doesn't kind of get where you're coming from, man?
It's one of the reasons why I do like that flexibility working from home, because as much as I talk about patience and listen to people, I'm human, right? We all get stressed, we all just want to go outside and, let off some steam. And so that is one of the ways that I do that. Sometimes it might be speaking to people in the industry. As I said to you already, I've got some very good friends that I've either worked with or either just know of that I can talk to. It's taking a breather. It's sitting back. It's often thinking to myself, what would, depending on who it is you're dealing with, but maybe what would the Neil of 10 years ago, how would I have reacted? And perhaps it might be similar to what I'm now dealing with somebody else. And so take yourself away from it. Even if it's things that I'm trying to advocate, even if it's go and take a 5-minute walk, go and make yourself a cup of coffee, and then come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes, and a bit of a reinvigorated mindset. But I'm glad you've mentioned that, because it is often a big source of frustration when other people just don't understand what you're trying to do and why it's so important. The salesperson probably doesn't really care which stock code you've got, because to them it's, go back to that word obvious, to them it's obvious that we're selling that product to that customer. And to me it may be obvious, but as you've just said so yourself, the person that might join the company in a year's time that we haven't yet employed, well, it won't be obvious to them, will it? But if they can just search for an industry term or a term that we know customers will often ask for, we look at specs of lubricants, right? How many times do we get asked for a low ash oil? How many times do we ask for a C3 530, some of the really common products? Put it in the background of the stock codes that if you're a newbie, you could type in low ash. And sure, it might bring up, 20 odd products of different viscosities and different pack sizes, but at least it's drilled down a little bit more than just putting in 5W30. So again, it goes back to that thing. It's obvious to you and me, but it wouldn't have been obvious to you and me when we first started out in our career, would it? And that's how I like to approach it. Essentially what I'm trying to do here is build a structure, build a business that's scalable, and a structure that somebody could walk into it tomorrow and have a rough idea as to how to pick things up, and if not, at least be able to work it backwards. And I think also from my own experiences, it's how I learned so much. It's how I absorbed so much, by having that kind of mindset of thinking, well, what is that, and why does it say that, and basically having the tools that I needed, basically.
And I think what we've heard is a lot is a lot of great examples of practical application. I mean, you're clearly somebody that is self-motivated. You've talked about how you're accountable to yourself. And that's the 21 to 31-year-old Neil, right? And all of these experiences have fed this very active, shower talking monster that is always building this what's next. So with this what's next lens, what do you see happening in the next 10 years? Not from your profession, not for you, but maybe the next 10 years to 41. What do you see playing out? What trends, mega trends, what ideas? What do you think is going to happen in the industry or around us?
Yeah, I think we could, if we were to learn from history, if we look back at kind of the major companies in the industry, it's probably going to be what they're doing to an extent, because eventually it always filters back down. What the majors are doing will eventually filter back down to what the independents are doing, and then subsequently what the distributors are doing. And I think it's going to be based on the technology of, we look at things like AI, for instance. Even that's pretty crazy, like when you think about it. And that's when I say about, the different generations, even myself as a millennial, if you'd have said to me as a teenager, in 15 years time, you're going to be able to type in whatever you want into an app and it'll bring up everything, off the internet. You'd be like, what? Surely not. Or it can create content. It's wild. And if I'm honest with you, Steve, sometimes I just don't know. Sometimes I think, where is it going to end up? I don't know. Is the honest answer? Yeah. Don't know everything. Who does?
Well, yeah, where's it going to end up? Who knows? And you're quite right. I think this ability. I mean, Rob, my business partner, he is absolutely fascinated by what you've just said. Those moments when AI just turns out something that could have taken ages to have developed and delivered, and he sees the effectiveness and efficiencies driving through that. So you see that playing out within the industry, becoming much more connected to artificial intelligence, do you?
I think so, yeah. I mean, even just something popped into my head then is, the vehicle lookup that you can do on numerous lubricant manufacturers' websites. You put it in a reg. It only really works, I think, for cars. I think some commercial vehicles, but not too many. But, you type in the reg and it tells you what lubricant it needs. And it tells you what it needs in the engine. It will tell you what kind of antifreeze it needs. It will tell you what it needs in the transmission. That probably wasn't around 20 years ago, was it? So even that in itself is a massive advancement that we can all use to our benefit. So yeah, I think we're driven by technology. We just need to kind of adapt that to our businesses and see, well, how can that, one, improve our business, two, how can it improve the customer experience, and three, how can it improve our employee experience? As I've said at the start, I'm not the most academic of people. I understand lubricants. I understand them, relatively well technically. Do I understand how AI actually works? Nope, haven't really got a clue. So I think what we should also embrace is the people that do. And if that is the younger generation that, people are branding as being lazy, actually, maybe we can learn a thing or two from them. as we can, from vice versa. I think it's bringing that together. I think the best companies are the companies that have people from all generations, all kind of backgrounds, education, genders, cultures, the whole lot, and age. I think those, from my own experience, they're the best kind of businesses. Because I've worked in the field like myself in the past, when going back to 18, 19, 20-year-old Neil, I sort of began to flourish when I had people around me that some that were similar age, some that had maybe 5 or 6 years experience, additional that I had, and some people in their 40s and 50s that kind of, took me under the wing and taught me the things that I know. So yeah, just blending the whole lot together.
But we're still going to need people, right? Do you still see that being as an important aspect of the lubes business?
Absolutely, 100% yes. We see it in every aspect of our lives. You go and, I don't know, take lubricants out of it for a second. You go and try and phone the bank. How annoyed do we get when you go through like a series of questions, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and you just sat there on the phone saying, I want to speak to a human. And so I do believe it's the same in the lubricants industry. So yes, we can automate processing orders. Yes, we've had things like telemetry around, for decades now, probably. But you still need to speak to a human. And I tell you when you need to speak to a human the most is when things go wrong. Because things do go wrong, things will go wrong, whether it's a fault of a person or whether it's a fault of a machine, it will happen. And those are the times I believe that as a customer particularly, you want to speak to a human being that knows what they're talking about. And so yes, there will always be a need for us humans.
Good. I feel reassured. So with that, I mean, you mentioned that things go wrong, and I just want to reflect a bit. I love these stories because I hear about all the positivity, the energy, all the excitement, and it reinvigorates somebody like me listening into what you're bringing to the space, Neil. So thank you for sharing what you have so far. But maybe there's a moment or something that we could share with the listeners that you think is a valuable learning experience, something that they could take away that maybe you've done wrong or you've learned from, that you're happy to share with them.
Yeah, I think I could probably, if I may, could probably be a little bit broader than that and just say that I think self-reflection is the most important thing. For me, whether it's been my career, I look back at things I might have thought or said 5 or 10 years ago and be like, did I really say that? And no doubt, I might listen to this podcast in 10 years' time, Steve, and think, what was I on about? Why did that? How embarrassing. But accepting that and embracing that and that's development, right? That's development of yourself and fundamental, that's development of your career. That's the most important thing for me. If I say to anyone, let's say you took a 16-year-old, hasn't got a clue what they want to do with their career, as I was at 16, learn what you can, take every opportunity which you can, and take time to reflect on yourself, whether it's quarterly, yearly, 5-yearly, because it goes fast. It really does go fast. Blink of an eye, I'll probably be, 40, but I will certainly be reflecting, every couple of years on myself. And yeah, that's probably the one piece of advice I'd give somebody.
I mean, I love that. And a testament to it does go quick. So enjoy it while you're reflecting. And yeah. So Neil, I want to say thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Blend. I mean, we've taken a tour around, your journey from school to, all of the aspects of leadership, good and bad, that you've learned, and now senior leader, EL Oils. And I guess we're starting to see you clearly defining your leadership style and structure and how you are shaping and influencing those that work with you. And I have to say, having listened to this, I feel really glad we've had this conversation, and I've learned a lot, and I've got to know you better, as I hope our listeners equally have done so. So Neil, if people are motivated too, how could they reach out to you, connect with you?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm by no means a master of it. I still don't really get what it's for.
Thanks ever so much, Neil.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Blend. Be sure to follow us to catch next and future episodes as we continue to explore the people within the lubricant market.